Now, I imagine that some of you, with all of the fantastic talks we've had so far today on this topic, would have seen AI up there and thought, bloody hell, not another one. But with energy levels perhaps dipping a little bit with the afternoon session, I thought I would make this a little bit more interactive. Can I get a quick show of hands from those in the room that would claim to be pretty confident at being able to spot an AI fake online these days? Quick show of hands. Is anyone feeling confident? Okay, all right. I like the slight levels of confidence in the room. Well, for those of you that did put your hands up, you may regret that in a few minutes, because what better way to test those claims than with a simple quiz? It's going to be very simple and easy. I am going to show you a series of images, and all you have to do is guess which ones are AI and which ones are not. I'd encourage you to work with people sitting next to you. Just whisper at this stage, don't raise your hands, because we'll go back through it again and see what you got. And to make things more difficult, I'm going to give you about 10 seconds per image, just to raise the stakes a little bit higher. So let's start. Do we think that this is an AI-generated image or a real one? Less than 10 seconds. As I said, try and work with the people sitting next to you. Some mountaineers in the snow. What about this one? Similar image. Do we think that this is an AI fake or not? A few more seconds. Moving on. A nice fluffy cat. Do we think that this is a real image or a fake? A few more seconds again. What about this one? Is this real or is this fake? We're going to raise the stakes a little bit. These ones are going to be a little bit harder. Do we think that this sewer grate on the side of a road is real or fake? I feel sorry for the people at the back. This might be even harder. And what about this fire hydrant, last one? Do we think that this is real or fake? Well, let's see how you did. Can I get a quick show of hands for those of you that thought that this one was an authentic image? Okay, interesting. Well, you would be correct if you put your hand up. This is indeed an authentic image, so well done. And this means that this is an AI-generated image, so congratulations if you've got 2 out of 2 so far. Hands up if you thought that this was AI-generated. Oh, okay, more hands now. Well, congratulations to those of you that put your hands up. This is indeed AI-generated, and therefore this one is real. This is a real photograph taken with a camera. Final 2, hands up if you thought that this was authentic. Oh, okay. I hate to say it, but this is AI-generated, and that means that this one is also AI-generated. Sorry, guys, you didn't think I was going to go that easy on you, did you? So, can I quickly see, did anyone get full marks? And please be honest, did actually anyone get full marks? Okay, I've seen like 2 hands. Well, congratulations. You can proudly claim to be a deepfake expert. Just probably, though, for the day, because I want you now to imagine how difficult that quiz could be in 2, 3, or even 5 years' time when AI becomes even more realistic and sophisticated. Personally, I don't know if I would even be able to get one of those right if I was doing that again in a few years, let alone 2 or more. In fact, we may reach a point in the next few years where it will become virtually impossible to discern AI-generated content with our own eyes. And now, that doesn't really matter too much in the context of fluffy cats or fire hydrants, but it does start to matter when AI starts replicating people, because as the gap in realism between AI-generated and human-created content gets narrower, so too do the lines between facts and fiction risk getting blurrier. And it isn't, unfortunately, just celebrities or politicians who can get deepfaked these days, but pretty much anyone, including you, or, unfortunately, me, although I must admit that this was a rare case where I actually consented to being deepfaked. Within my role at the Alan Turing Institute, I've spent the last 3 years understanding how AI has been impacting the way that we have been interacting with AI, digital content, and all kinds of things online. And in particular, I've been looking to understand how those seeking to cause harm have weaponized these tools during critical periods of democracy to spread confusion and even in some cases incite real-world violence. Now, mis and disinformation, they're not new problems. They've been around for decades, arguably centuries. The difference now, however, is that AI tools massively democratize access to these kinds of harmful activities. In other words, all you need to have is a computer and a bit of creativity, and you could potentially create hyper-realistic content at a speed and scale that was previously inconceivable. If you think that deepfake up there of me is quite worrying, well, unfortunately, that is just the tip of the iceberg. I want to cast all of your minds back to the beginning of 2024. We were entering what was known as the super election year, where more than 70 countries and nearly 2 billion people were going out to vote in the polls in what was one of the largest election periods in history. It was also the first time when a lot of people were concerned, quite rightly, about the impact that AI could have on our election processes. And if you were to look at some of the headlines that were coming out at the start of the year, you would come across these quite concerning and alarmist narratives, essentially saying that we were going to face probably a tidal wave of deepfakes and that voters would essentially have no idea whether they were looking at something that was real or fake. In other words, we were totally screwed. Yet if we then fast forward to the end of the year, after all these elections had finished, we suddenly get a very different set of media headlines. Everyone was celebrating how the AI threat had been completely overblown and that we had even probably been deepfaked by the deepfakes. The question, though, is how did we get from such a radical shift in narratives in such a short space of time? And were these assessments correct? Well, the answer is sort of. Because what we found was that this concern over a doomsday scenario, this major short-term impact on election outcomes, never quite materialized as many were concerned about. And that was because AI formed just a tiny portion of the overall misinformation picture. For example, back in the UK general election a few years ago, you might assume that there were hundreds, if not thousands, of deepfakes targeting the likes of Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer. But you would be mistaken. When we looked very closely at that election campaign, we found 16, just 16 examples of deepfakes during the whole campaign period. And then if we fast forward to the US election, just later that year, we did some network analysis on one of the most viral deepfakes at that time, which you can actually see up there. And what we found was that, well, it had about 4 days' worth of virality before user engagement pretty much dropped off entirely. In other words, people kind of just forgot about it, and it didn't really matter. Yet, while that short-term impact on election outcomes never really materialized, what many people were overlooking was this more insidious threat, this second-order impact on our wider democratic system from these types of harmful activities. Because when we were looking at the types of deepfakes that were circulating online and looking at the comments sections of them, we were finding that many people were really just confused over whether they were looking at something which was real or not. And to make matters worse, some people were claiming that this was legitimate in the comments, and others were saying, no, this is a deepfake. And it got to the point where some people were even saying, I no longer know what to trust, what I see online anymore, because everything just looks so real. And this doesn't just pose issues for our ability to obtain verified and credible information during election periods, but it also poses all kinds of problems for fact-checking more generally, including allowing conspiracy theories to thrive, some of which are just a bit bonkers. I want to envisage for a moment you're a politically active person, you're an enthusiastic voter, and an election has just been announced. You're not really sure who you're going to vote for, and so you think, well, okay, I'm going to go down to my local constituency, check out what all the candidates have to say, and see maybe who I should be voting for. After a few of those meetings, you start to notice something's a bit off. One of these candidates isn't showing up, and he doesn't show up for sort of 2 or 3 of these sessions. So you do a bit of investigation online, you go on their social media profile, and you notice something else that doesn't seem quite right. The photos, they look almost AI-generated, AI-edited. And then to make matters worse, you get to polling day when the votes just finished and the election results are being announced. And, well, surprise, surprise, the candidate doesn't even show up to hear if he won or he lost the constituency he was running in. And I'm just going to ask quickly, if you heard that and you didn't have any other evidence, how many people would think that that candidate was probably non-existent, fake, maybe not real? Okay, quite a few people. Well, this is also what the media then started reporting on. There were these claims that we maybe have just seen the first ever time in history where an AI bot had ran for an election. Crucially, though, unbeknown to absolutely anyone. And actually, in the end, it turned out that this individual, Mark Matlock, was indeed a real person. The poor bloke just unfortunately had a really bad bout of pneumonia during the campaign season that meant he was hospitalized the whole time. So he just couldn't turn up to any of these events. But then you might be wondering, well, what about the whole AI edit stuff? Well, Mark rather embarrassingly admitted to using AI editing software to smoothen out a few blemishes on his face, make his jawline a bit sharper, because he thought, maybe that will help me resonate with voters. Unfortunately, it didn't quite go to plan because poor old Mark came last in his election result. But, you know, elections are one thing, but crisis events, well, they're a whole nother problem entirely. We roughly know when an election campaign is going to be held, and that gives us time to prepare ourselves for threats from, for example, deepfakes. But terrorist attacks, national security emergencies, international conflicts, well, they don't afford us that same luxury. They can happen at any time, they can take us completely by surprise and leave us without any warning whatsoever. And the problem really with crisis events is that facts take time to be established on the ground over what happened, who was involved, maybe even the motive of why this happened. But people crave answers, they crave certainty. And that doesn't stop, therefore, people going on, for example, social media, to speculate about what happened or who was involved in something, including, people claiming to be eyewitness accounts or showing footage purporting to come from the scene of an ongoing incident. The problem, though, is that when we don't know what is verified and what isn't, this creates a perfect storm for those seeking to cause harm. Just look at what happened in Southport a few years ago. After a series of horrific attacks in the Merseytown town of Southport, online misinformation over the suspect's identity helped to contribute to a wave of violent riots across the entire country. Yet, how could AI transform those types of dynamics? Well, it's worth starting off with a pretty worrying statistic. Southport wasn't, unfortunately, a one-off. Since then, we identified at least 14 other crisis events internationally where these types of threats were observed. And we did see, for example, lots of deepfakes. Just take the Bondi Beach terrorist attack last year in Australia, where shortly after the incident occurred, a viral image was going on the rounds on social media, suggesting that one of the survivors had actually staged his injuries. He was painting blood on his face. This thing wasn't real. It was a false flag attack. The problem was that it wasn't a real image. It was a deepfake. But that didn't stop it being viewed over 10 million times by users on social media, and unfortunately also contributing to all kinds of anti-Semitic narratives at the time. Yet beyond just the generation of content, we are also seeing how AI tools themselves are creating new risks. As AI chatbots get increasingly embedded into our social media platforms, our online search engines, even our private messaging apps, more and more people are starting to rely on them. I'm pretty guilty myself. And some of that is around things like information gathering, news consumption, and even fact-checking. The problem, however, is that AI tools just aren't very good at providing accurate information and knowing what is verified and what isn't. They simply just scrape whatever they can find off the internet, but they can repackage those claims in a way that sounds highly convincing, authoritative, and persuasive. In some cases, they just also make stuff up, they hallucinate, and that can have real-world consequences. Just take the example of Michael Mallison. Shortly after the Charlie Kirk assassination in the US last year, the suspect at the time was still on the run. Law enforcement hadn't detained them. And as I mentioned earlier, that didn't stop people from looking online for answers over who was maybe involved or who were they tracking. And in some cases, a few users were even asking an inbuilt chatbot on a major social media platform to know what it was sort of seeing in this situation. And it claimed that there had been a breakthrough. A name had been identified. Finally, we can now try and track down this individual. And, well, it turned out that this person, Michael Mallison, who had been named, was just someone that had no relation to the incident whatsoever. He was a pensioner, a 77-year-old man living in Toronto in Canada who had absolutely no connection to the incident. But that didn't stop him from receiving all kinds of death threats and even doxing attacks from people trying to find his address to so-called bring him to justice. Now, it doesn't take much to imagine how that situation could have ended up very differently, because thankfully, Michael himself wasn't harmed. But I imagine at this stage, many of you are feeling rather pessimistic about the role of AI for our democracy, and I don't blame you. Some of these cases show how damaging these tools can be when they are wielded for malicious purposes. But I want to emphasize that it doesn't have to be that way. Things can be different, and they can get better. And that's because AI is fundamentally just a tool at the end of the day. And while it can be used for malicious purposes, it can also be used for beneficial ones, such as strengthening societal resilience or bolstering election security. And with more users now starting to resort to AI chatbots to get their news, we have exciting new opportunities to leverage these same capabilities to not only amplify verified information, but also debunk harmful conspiracy theories at a speed and a scale that was previously only dreamt of before these tools existed. Just take the case of DebunkBot. Developed by a series of researchers from Carnegie Mellon and Cornell University in the States, DebunkBot has been trained entirely on conspiracy theories. But also, crucially, it's been trained on counter rebuttals to those conspiracy theories that have proven effective in evidential research. And after a test on 2,000 participants in the US who proclaimed to believe in a harmful conspiracy theory, researchers found that conversations with this chatbot led to a 20% reduction in their own beliefs of these types of theories, with some effects lasting up to 2 or 3 months after the experiment had even ended. Now, imagine rather than just 2,000 people, we were to scale that up to 20,000, 200,000, or even 2 million people who proclaim to believe in a harmful conspiracy theory. The opportunities are endless. But if there's one thing that I want everyone to take away from today's talk, it's this. We shouldn't be placing our blind faith in the ability of AI to provide us with accurate information 24/7. These are not, unfortunately, fact-checking experts. They are merely data scraping and language prediction tools. So before the next time you try and sort of use any AI outputs or act on any AI suggestions, just remember to pause and think for a moment. Investigate the links, cross-reference those sources with factual information or verified articles, and always remember, if something looks too good to be real, it's probably AI generated. Thank you.